Fungi are incredibly diverse in their form and in their function. In this slide, you can see somewhat of a simplified life cycle of a mushroom and of a mold. So by mold, I mean everything that doesn't really look like a mushroom. And you can see that below here is the mycelia. All fungi, or most fungi actually, regardless of their taxonomy, they make mycelia. Some very primitive fungi don't. They exist more so like spores only, but most fungi, their base form is mycelial. So this right here, you can see it right here too, and you've probably seen it already in your wood blocks, for example. All of the whitish stuff that is growing on your wood block is mycelium. And then this mycelium, when it's ready to reproduce, it develops a asexual structure, which in this case is this conidiophore, it's called, which bears the spores. The spores fly away and disperse, and then each one of these spores is going to create a new mycelium, completing one asexual life cycle of, in this case, of a mold. And then in the case of mushroom, it's a little bit more complicated because mushrooms are kind of like the fruit of the mycelium, and it's actually called fruiting body. But everything starts with a mycelium as well. However, for mushrooms to be formed, there needs to be a sexual union between two different mycelium of the same species. So when two different mycelia reproduce sexually, the mushroom develops, and the mushroom or fruiting body, because not all fruiting bodies are mushrooms, but all fruiting bodies are the result of sexual reproduction. They form the fruiting body, and then on the fruiting body, you can find the spores. The spores will disperse. Each one of these spores is going to create a new mycelium, and then this way, one sexual cycle of the fungus is completed. And you can see here what quote unquote molds look like right here, and you can see what fruiting bodies look like over here. And as you can see, there's a very huge variety of molds in terms of how they look, in terms of their size, their color. And you can see there's also a huge variety of fruiting bodies, the way they look, their colors, and so on. And this is only a small example of fungal diversity in terms of their form, but some of the most wild forms are really incredible, and I hope I get to see them in real life at some point. I've seen some of them, but not all of them. But all of the pictures that you see right here are different forms of fungi. So this is one of the most simple ones. This is a yeast, and it's a unicellular organism, but it's a fungus. This right here, this is a truffle. Truffles are really interesting. They're a delicacy. Edible truffles, because there's non-edible truffles, and non-edible truffles are not as exciting as edible ones. But edible truffles are a delicacy, and you can find them in usually forests around the world. And these, I'm not exaggerating when I say that some truffles are worth thousands of dollars. There's a really interesting movie called Pig, like the animal, Pig, where they talk to some extent about the industry of truffles. And it's really interesting because usually pigs are used to find truffles, because truffles are found underground, and the volatiles, like the aroma of the truffles underground, pigs can smell it. So then pigs usually go and sniff the truffles and will show their owner where to dig to actually extract the truffle. It's really interesting. And then there's like the very common molds that most of us have seen at some point when we leave our fruit and vegetables in the fridge for too long. There's also some very unique fungi that you can find in the desert. Actually, these fungi right here, these fruiting bodies, and this one right here, I found in Las Cruces. This one, I just found it in my backyard, and this one I found it in right next to to the Rio Grande in La Llorona Park. These fungi are really interesting because they are adapted to desert conditions, and you can see that they look really dry and really strawy. There's other types of fruiting bodies like this one right here. This is a ball, and you can see that it has a hole on the top. So if you were to poke this ball, then you would see a lot of spores coming out of this hole right here. This one is one of my very favorite fungi because they're so unique in their form. They're called bird's nest. And you can see that there's this sort of like cup right here. And then in the inside of the cup, you can see the spores, which are actually huge. Even though this as a whole is a really small mushroom, you can't really tell here in the picture, but they're really small. The spores, you can see them with your naked eye. So that makes the spores actually really huge. This is one of the fruiting bodies that I hope to see one day in my life. They're really unique, and it looks like some sort of like very complicated geometric figure, but it is a fungus and it is a fruiting body. This is another form of a fungus, which I hope none of you have, and if you have, it's really difficult to get rid of. But you know, a lot of people struggle with fungi in their feet. These particularly is known as onychomycosis because it's a fungus that is growing in the nail of a person, and they're very, very, very common and very difficult to get rid of. Another fruiting body that's really unique is this one. It's called Morchella, and it's also an edible mushroom, although there's two types of Morchellas. The fake Morchella and a real Morchella. So the real Morchella is the one that it's really good and it's a delicacy as well. The fake Morchella, you can eat it, but it's not a delicacy. This is another one of the mushrooms that I hope to see one day. It's called something like bride veils or something like that because it resembles like the veil of a bride. Another very unique one is this one. It's called dead man's fungus because it resembles like the hand of a dead body. Another very unique fungus is this one. It looks like some sort of alien. It smells really, really bad, and it attracts flies and other insects because of its bad smell. And then it uses those insects as vectors to transport the spores. This other fungus looks also very unique. I've never seen it in real life. It looks interesting and gross at the same time. This other fruiting body is also a fungi, and you can find some of these in the forests around Mexico. And then finally, this other one, it's called auricularia, and it resembles an ear, and it's also a mushroom or fruiting body. So you can see the huge diversity of fruiting bodies that you can find in the kingdom fungi. The biodiversity and the biodiversity of form is just really, really impressive in the kingdom fungi. And the ecology of fungi is equally diverse and equally complicated. Some fungi are beneficial for plants. As you see here, there's a lot of symbiotic fungi. There's actually a lot of plants that cannot grow unless they're associated with fungi. And through this relationship, fungi facilitate sugars and nutrients to the plant. And then in return, the plant will provide also some sugars to the fungus. However, there's other fungi that are pathogenic to plants, so they cause them diseases. You can find something very similar going on between insects and fungi. So for example, here you can see ants carrying pieces of leaves. These leaf cutter ants, maybe you've seen them. A lot of people think that they are carrying these leaves because this is what they eat. And actually, that's not the case. These ants are carrying these leaves because they harvest mycelium. So they're carrying these leaves to their to their home, because in their home they collect all of these leaves and they grow a fungus, and the ants actually feed off of the fungus. The ants eat the mycelia, so they actually carry these leaves to grow and eventually harvest the fungus. But then there's other fungi that are pathogenic to insects as well, and you can see one here. So this insect was completely colonized and eventually killed by this fungus right here, this fruiting body. Eventually, when the insect dies, then the fruiting body emerges. And there's a lot of interesting information about these pathogenic fungi. You can look it up if you Google um, um, zombie ants or something like that, because the changes in the behavior of the insects when they are colonized by the fungus is really, really creepy. So usually the fungus will colonize the ants, and then the behavior of the ant will change completely. It'll start acting really, really strange, go to some weird place to die, usually at the top of a plant, and then die at the very top. And then once it dies, the fruiting body emerges and disperses its spores. So there's a lot of very interesting / creepy videos online. And even humans, we have such a interesting relationship with fungi. We eat them, they're super delicious. And in the last video, you saw how useful fungi are for everything in our lives, from water um, to drugs to cure diseases, to chemicals for industry, to dyes for clothes. Just every single thing that we do, I can think about a fungus that helps us achieve that. But at the same time, there's some fungi that are pathogenic to humans, and usually fungal diseases, especially the ones that are inside your body, so not so much like onychomycosis, but some other types of fungal infections that you get inside your body are really, really difficult to treat, and many of them are fatal. And that's because fungi, as humans, are not a monolith. They have very diverse and intricate identities. And what's most interesting is that many of these identities intersect. And some pathogenic microbes are a really good example of intersectionality in fungi. So for example, here you can see blastomycosis, coccidiomycosis, and Cryptococcus gattii. So these are 3 fungal infections that attack humans. Blastomycosis is caused by blastomyces. Coccidiomycosis, also known as valley fever, is caused by coccidioides, and then cryptococcosis, caused by Cryptococcus gattii, is another infection. All of these infections usually initiate in the lung via the inhalation of spores when they're in the environment. And what's really interesting about these organisms of blastomyces, coccidioides, and cryptococcus is that all of these fungi inhabit the soil. So you can see here, they are blastomyces is inhabiting a forest, coccidioides is inhabiting a desert, and cryptococcus is also inhabiting a forest. And when they are in their natural environment, which is the soil in all 3 cases, they're just there. They're living a normal life as a soil fungi. They're decomposing, they're interacting with other organisms, and they're just carrying out a saprotrophic life cycle. And a saprotrophic life cycle is just a fungus that is free living and existing in the soil. However, when their spores disperse, usually through air, in some cases through some vectors like rodents, these spores on themselves aren't pathogenic, but when they go inside a host, which in this case is a person, and this person perhaps is immunocompromised, then the fungus will switch to a pathogenic state and will cause a disease in the human. In these all 3 cases, again, the disease usually starts in the lungs, but then it can get pretty ugly and infect your entire body via your bloodstream. In some awful cases, it can even infect your brain. And treating fungal diseases is really difficult because fungi are eukaryotic organisms just like us humans. So our cells, even though we look so different to fungi, our cells are pretty similar than fungal cells in terms of the way that they work. So it's really difficult to develop a drug that you take and that it's only going to be harmful to the fungi. That's why usually a lot of medication for mycosis, this is the name of fungal infections, a lot of those drugs, they don't recommend you to take them for too long because they can end up hurting some of your own cells in your liver, for example. So treating fungal diseases, it's really complicated. It's not like when you get a bacterial disease and you can take antibiotic and get rid of them. With fungi, it's not like that. It's a little bit more complicated. But again, going back to their ecology, you can see how interesting fungi can be in terms of their identity. They can be saprotrophic and harmless, but they can also be pathogenic and cause diseases. It really depends under which lens you are studying fungi. And I think this is really interesting because it really reminds me of how we are as humans. We have multiple identities. I identify as a woman. I identify as a person of color. I identify as an immigrant. I identify as a first generation college student. So there's a lot of things that I identify as, and the way that I see life really depends on through which lens I'm seeing things. And then it gets really complicated when you think about all of those identities intersecting. So it's very similar with fungi. Sometimes people ask me, I found this fungus. Is it a bad fungus? And I'm like, well, it really depends which fungus we're talking about. And it can be pathogenic, but it cannot. It really depends on the species of fungi, and it really depends on its life cycle, what stage it's going through, and in some cases, your health condition. Most fungal pathogens are not pathogenic to healthy people, but some people struggling with some immune diseases, for example, they are definitely more susceptible to infection by fungi. So what I want you to take away with this presentation is that by studying the diversity of fungi, by including them in our science, by having a broad vision, by understanding their intersectionality, we're enriching our understanding of life on Earth. And I hope that with this project, your eyes opened a little bit about how wonderful the kingdom fungi is, and how diverse and how complicated fungi are, and that you're curious and that you're looking to learn a little bit more. And this is one of my favorite pictures. My husband took it, and this is a fairy ring. This is how they're called, and you can see them often in the main lawn in NMSU around all the way from, I think I've seen them from May to August. So if you see them around an MSU, you're welcome to take a picture like I did. Just remember that these are called fairy rings, and they're very typical in some fungal species. And before you ask, because every time that there's fungal fairy rings in the main lawn in MSU, I get emails about asking me about these mushrooms and if they're edible. And I want to tell you that these are not edible, and the common name of these mushrooms is vomiter. You can imagine why. So take care, and I hope you've enjoyed this presentation and this project overall.